This team is no joke. As far as I'm concerned, the Los Angeles Clippers have officially become one of the top 4 teams in the Western Conference. And I dare say they are on the verge of being better than the Lakers before this season ends.
The Los Angeles Clippers are a franchise that has been an up and down roller coaster for most of their existence. To give a brief summary of their conception, the San Diego Clippers were relocated and redubbed as the Los Angeles Clippers, and they were indeed the laughingstock of the NBA. Before the 2010s, they would only make the playoffs 6 times in their 28 years of being a franchise. Their best years ranged from being mediocre to surprising in some areas. While they had some star players to play for their organization, they were never good enough to make the Clippers stay relevant for a long period of time. They were known as the franchise that were the little brothers to a more superior Los Angeles team, as the Lakers, whom at the time had more championships than they had playoff appearances. They were known as a team that drafted a bust with their #1 overall pick in the '98 draft over players like Vince Carter, Dirk Nowitzki, and Paul Pierce. And they never had a franchise cornerstone that would help them contend for titles and be taken seriously. But due to the Clippers in 2009 having one of the worst records in the league, they were able to grab the #1 overall pick for the '09 draft, which they would end up selecting
Blake Griffin, the all-galaxy, all-everything forward from the University of Oklahoma, goes #1. 4th straight year a Big 12 player was selected in the top 2.
A player who was known as a high flyer in Oklahoma, and at the time was looked as the best choice to draft, as he could be the key to unlocking a championship for the Clippers down the line. The only problem is that Blake Griffin would be sidelined for his entire rookie season due to an injury which promptly put a halt to the team's resurgence, but the following year would be the start of a new era. Blake Griffin would finally play in his technically first NBA season, and he would show immediately why he was known as a primetime dunker, as he showed his raw athletic ability, and he was a lethal pick and roll threat. He'd go on to show out in the All-Star weekend, as he was named an All-Star, and he'd have one of the most memorable dunk contests with his iconic dunk over a Kia car to win the competition. While Blake Griffin would have an amazing rookie year and he would end up winning the Rookie of the Year award, the Clippers did not make the playoffs that year, and they definitely need to make some changes to pair somebody with Blake Griffin for them to finally push for the playoffs. And in the 2011 offseason, they were able to pull off a steal.
The Clippers go Hollywood in the race between LA teams to land super point guard Chris Paul.
The Los Angeles Clippers have officially become one of the top 4 teams in the Western Conference. They are on the verge of being better than the Lakers before this season ends.
The Clippers, which were now dubbed as Lob City, were now expected to be one of the best teams in not only the Western Conference, but also the superior team in Los Angeles. They had major success in the regular season, as during the lockout, they finished as the 5th seed. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin were clearly the top dogs of the team and one of the best rising duos in the league. They would enter the playoffs facing the Grizzlies in their first playoff series ever as the newly formed team, and they would have a legendary Game 1 performance where they would have an incredible comeback.
9 on the clock. Griffin working his way in. Down the court. Finds Young for 3. He's got it. Here's Paul in the corner. Nick Young again. He's got it again. Here is Paul. Inside to Evans. Lays it in.
Hold on. Cannot do that. He just did that on that possession.
7 points for the Grizzlies, and the Clippers lead by 1. Here is Rudy Gay. Fires it up. Short. Taken down by Griffin, and the Clippers have won it. One of the more remarkable comebacks in playoff history.
They would eventually beat the Grizzlies in 7 games, and even though they almost blew a 3-1 lead, they would move on to the second round where they would match up against the San Antonio Spurs. And in that series, the Spurs would just completely sweep them, as the Clippers had no answer. But with a second round exit under their belts, this team had hope and higher expectations for winning an NBA championship. The 2013 season was a step in the right direction for this team, as Chris Paul and Blake Griffin would continue to dominate, and this was also the year for the rise of DeAndre Jordan as becoming the 3rd player in the trio. They would also gain a massive upgrade with their bench, as they would assign Jamal Crawford, who was a great 6-man and had one of the best handles in NBA history. It was at this point the Clippers were getting a lot of attention, and they were becoming one of the best teams in the Western Conference besides the Thunder and the Spurs. The Clippers were now becoming the more relevant team in Los Angeles, so the question was, could they compete for an NBA title. They would head into the playoffs as they finished as the 4th seed, and they were matched up against the Memphis Grizzlies once again in a rematch. They would start out having a 2-0 series lead after Chris Paul had an amazing game winner to cap off game 2. It seemed like they were heading in the right direction, but then that is when the bad luck set in, as Blake Griffin was suffering from an ankle injury, and then they would manage to blow a 2-0 series lead and eventually lose the series in 6, setting the trend of what was yet to come for the Clippers later on down the line. But changes were definitely needed, and they would make some big changes in the offseason. The following season was a year where a lot of things happened for this team. For starters, the Clippers would trade for Doc Rivers to be the new coach. They actually almost were able to get Kevin Garnett in this trade with Doc Rivers as well, but the NBA put a stop to that real quick because that would have just been way too ridiculous. They would also gain another player in JJ Redick, who was an amazing sharpshooter and had a lot of playoff experience and would be another offensive weapon in a stacked roster. They would once again dominate in the regular season, and they would again take over the NBA with their fast-paced offense and their athleticism. This would be the best year in franchise history as they won 57 games and were heading into the playoffs hungry. But then very dark and unfortunate news would cloud the team during the playoffs, as news reports would come out about Donald Sterling, who was the owner at the time, recorded and having said racial remarks towards Magic Johnson. This would set the NBA world on fire, and this was definitely not a good look for the Clippers as a franchise because they had nothing to do with this, but due to their owner being outed as a racist, it definitely became a distraction. But as a protest, the entire team would wear their pre-game warm-ups inside out, disowning the brand as a whole. But distractions aside, the Clippers would win in the first round in a tough and entertaining 7-game series against a young and up-and-coming Golden State Warriors team that were 1 year away from their eventual dynasty. Then they would be matched up against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and this would be one of the most memorable series in Clippers history. But the reasons are not what you think. Both teams would trade games as they were going back and forth, and the series was tied at 2 apiece, and this was definitely an entertaining series. And we would arrive at Game 5 at OKC, where it would be one for the ages, as the Clippers were up big in the 4th quarter, with a chance to go up 3-2 in the series and have a chance at making the Western Conference Finals for the first time in franchise history. And then one of the biggest choke jobs happened.
Here's Durant for 3, yes! And on the run, Paul is back, Durant scores! Paul had it knocked away by Westbrook, the steal leads to this, Jackson is fouled! Down by 2, Westbrook for the lead! 3 shots coming up for Russell Westbrook. 35 points in all to go. Oklahoma City on the road. This for the lead. Clutch down to 2. Trying to get it down low, and Ibaka took it away. The Oklahoma City Thunder have come from 15 back.
And last night was a glaring example of why Chris Paul, in his 9 NBA seasons, has never been out of the second round of the playoffs.
Somehow, the Clippers managed to blow a 7-point lead in under 45 seconds, and what could have gone wrong did go wrong. And then they would lose Game 6 in an embarrassing fashion after having a chance to beat the Thunder 2 games in a row, marking yet another year where the Clippers had a chance and opportunity to make a championship run, and they were stopped once again due to blowing another lead and bad coaching. The Clippers would head into the 2014-15 season looking to redeem themselves after their total meltdown. They would once again be one of the best teams in the West, and people were wondering when they would finally win a championship, and were they finally going to break the Clippers curse. They would be battle tested in the first round as they would face the San Antonio Spurs, who were the defending champions, and this would be one of the best series in playoff history. The Spurs and Clippers would go back and forth, trading games, and it looked like this series could go either way, and we were gifted with a Game 7 in LA. Both teams would go back and forth in this game, as you can tell that they both wanted it. This would be very close from the beginning to the end, and with the game on the line, when everybody knew who was going to get the ball, Chris Paul would respond.
Green on Paul, and he got it! 1 second left! Clippers by 2! Gianna inbound, now they got Jordan in front of him. Inside, Leonard knocked away. Barnes! The defending champions have fallen! And have won this most dramatic series by 2.
CP3 was able to wield his team to victory, and you could see the look on his eyes that he felt like this may be their year, that they can finally do it. They just beat the defending champs, so this was definitely going to be their year. But the Clipper curse struck Chris Paul as he pulled a hamstring that would sideline him for the second round, as the Clippers would face the Houston Rockets, and in this round, they would actually dominate and go up 3-1 against Houston without Chris Paul for certain games. And with him back in the lineup, they were definitely going to win this series. A 3-1 series lead, what could possibly go wrong?
Comeback is complete. The Houston Rockets will play in their first conference final in 18 years.
They blew another lead, and Doc Rivers blew another 3-1 lead as their head coach, and another disappointing end to their season. And their championship window was closing as they were not the fan favorites anymore. The Clippers were able to bring back their core for yet another go at a championship, as they almost lost DeAndre Jordan to the Mavericks, but Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and the rest of the team pulled a maneuver that may or may not have been a hostage situation. This season was a bit of a down year for this team, mainly because of the fact that they were getting older. Blake Griffin was suffering through injuries, and they were just outshined by the Warriors and other teams in the West. They remained a solid team throughout the season, and they were ready for the playoffs, and they would finish as the 4th seed, and they would face off against the Blazers in the first round. They would jump out and go up 2-0 in the series, and they were looking solid, but then once again, the Clippers curse struck Chris Paul and Blake Griffin at the same time, as they both suffered injuries, sidelining them for the rest of the series, and the Clippers would lose this series, of course. The next year would be where the Clippers were just playing solid, and Blake and CP3 were not playing as much as they were absent, but DeAndre Jordan would become an all-star in 2017, which in hindsight was pretty bizarre to think about at that point in time. But the team would finish top 5 in the West, and they would face off against the Utah Jazz, which was a team no one expected to be that good in 2017. But they would manage to lose game 1 in a heartbreaking loss, and then once again, Blake Griffin would be out for the rest of the year due to another injury. They would try to win without Blake, and even manage the game 7, but the Jazz beat them in a double-digit loss. So the Lob City era, in the 7 years that they were together, failed to reach the conference finals. Blake Griffin suffered a lot of injuries, Chris Paul failed to win a title, and as a team, just could not get it done in the playoffs due to having big meltdowns. Chris Paul would grow tired of the organization and would leave the city of Los Angeles for good, being traded to the Houston Rockets, as Chris Paul finally was able to play alongside another ball distributor in James Harden, prematurely ending Lob City as we know it.
I've been all messed up because obviously like we love it out here. You know what I'm saying? Like basketball, boy, like the whole thing with our team, like a lot of people see the wins and losses and all that stuff like that, but it's the culture of our team. If you ain't trying to contend with the Warriors, then what are we doing?
The 2017-18 season was just a year of ups and downs. With Chris Paul's departure, Blake Griffin would go on to sign back to the Clippers and dubbed him as the franchise player.
And the process doesn't start during the actual presentation. It goes all the way back years ago, in that keeping Blake a Clipper forever. There's very few franchise players that start and finish their career with the same team. And this is Blake's ability to do so. And from a contractual standpoint, that's what we fully intend to do so.
Only for them to trade him after 33 games. And that era was now over, and a new one was forming, with the Clippers deciding to just rebuild as a whole. They would have a new identity as they had new guys on the team such as Tobias Harris, Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverley, and Lou Will. Although they missed the playoffs, they had a pretty respectable year, and with some great moments that showed promise. But the next season, we would get one of the most entertaining seasons from this franchise, and they surpassed a lot of expectations as they were looked at as a team that would not make the playoffs, but they proved a lot of people wrong. They played like they had a chip on their shoulder, and they had a lot of heart. They would enter the playoffs as the 8th seed, and given the defending champ Golden State Warriors a tough 6-game series, they would even pull off the largest point deficit comeback in playoff history. It would give us one of the most iconic moments in recent memory of KD versus Patrick Beverley. But after the 2019 playoffs, the Clippers were a team that had some young talent and were looking to consistently get better. And in the offseason, the NBA world would be shook.
Steve, what was your reaction when you heard about not only Kawhi Leonard heading to the Clippers, but also the trade involving Paul George?
Well, stunned.
Skip, I was shocked that they were able to pull this off, the new sheriff. He doesn't say much, has his hair cornrowed, he has a ginormous hammer.
I was totally shocked.
You got the reigning finals MVP and maybe the next best two-way wing in the league. A top 5 player and now also a top 15 player.
I'm here to let you know right now, ladies and gentlemen, the best duo is LeBron and Anthony Davis. But the Clippers have a better team.
They were now in yet another situation where they could compete for championships, as this was the best roster they have had since the Lob City era, especially to compete with the Lakers after acquiring Anthony Davis to team up with LeBron. So now everyone was hyping up and anticipating the Battle of LA. The 2020 season opener, we would see the Clippers against the Lakers, and it was a very electric environment. But the Clippers would take home the win against the Lakers, and they would also beat them on Christmas Day, completely convincing the world that they were the superior team in Los Angeles. Not only were the analysts saying this, but even Kawhi himself would make it very clear whose town this was in his commercial with New Balance. Even with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard low managing or being out due to injury, they were in good shape and they looked like title contenders. But everything would be shut down, as in 2020, the COVID virus would shut everything down and the NBA was put on a hiatus. But the regular season would continue and be moved to Orlando in the bubble, and the Clippers would finish the year 49-23 as the second seed in the Western Conference. The first round was against the Dallas Mavericks, and it would be a dogfight, as this was the birth of superstar Luka Doncic, whom he was playing at an all-time level. Luka would single-handedly keep the Mavericks in the series, and he had one of the most iconic moments that year with his overtime buzzer beater to tie the series.
Back to Doncic. Doncic pulls up, three-pointer. Bang! Bang! It's good! Doncic wins the game at the buzzer!
Luka's the best white boy I've seen since Larry Bird. This brother is something special.
The Mavs would lose in 6, but this was a red flag for what was yet to come, as the Mavericks should not have even gone to 6 games with the Clippers in the first place, as they were the superior team. And in round 2, they would face off against the Nuggets, who were fresh off of coming back from 3-1 against the Utah Jazz. People had the Nuggets not winning the series, as they just viewed them as a placeholder for the Battle of LA in the conference finals. No one had the Nuggets winning this series at all. The Nuggets would go down 3-1 as the Clippers were just showing dominance throughout each game, and the Clippers were now 1 win away from making the Western Conference Finals for the first time in franchise history. 1 win was all it took. And I'll let you guess what happened next.
Comes Michael Porter Jr.
Here comes Plumlee. Hold on to your hats, and Plumlee got the feed from Porter. And Jokic for the lead. Boom! 3-pointer. Wow! What a bomb thrown up by Porter. Bound Leonard. That's it. Denver survives. They'll play a game 6.
Murray working against Harrell. Nice crossover in traffic.
It's only 2 points this quarter. He had some good looks.
Great move by Murray. Takes it in and slams it home.
Green just missed a wide open shot.
In rhythm again. Jokic splashdown. Jamal Murray all the way to the bucket in the layup. Exploding on the Clippers. Can they do it again? They did it against Utah. They were down 3-1. Now they'll try to do it again against the Clippers.
You better not lose this damn series. You better not lose this series. LeBron is waiting. AD is waiting. It's time. We've been waiting all year. Lakers, Clippers, Clippers, Lakers. And the only people holding it up is y'all.
Get it. Shot clock winding down. Murray puts up a 3. Bang! Jamal Murray from downtown. 6-0 in elimination games here in the bubble. Much respect for the coaching staffs.
Kawhi Leonard. That might be the biggest choke job we've ever seen in NBA history. I mean, it was that bad. Paul George doesn't get taken off the hook either. I mean, his performance was abysmal. Doc Rivers, been there 7 years. You still can't get him to the NBA Finals.
I told you, nothing will kill a legacy more than expectation. If you're the best player on the planet, that cannot happen.
Put that suit of yours in the goddamn cleaners, because the is a wrap. Same old Clippers. Y'all still are little brothers.
And to make it even worse, the Lakers would end up winning the championship that year, as they were able to show dominance throughout the entire playoffs. The Clippers would end up firing Doc Rivers, ending his 7-year tenure with the franchise, and they would go on to hiring Tyronn Lue as his replacement, and the Clippers were looking to find light at the end of the tunnel. The start of the 2021 season would try to be a year of redemption for this team, and with the season being shorter due to COVID, there was no room for error. The Clippers would have a solid year, but no one in the media or fans cared, as for what happened in the bubble still was fresh in everyone's minds. They would finish as the 4th seed in the West and would once again be matched up with the Dallas Mavericks in a rematch. And the Mavs actually had the Clippers going for a couple of games as they went to go up 2-0 in the series, but Kawhi Leonard would show everybody once again why he was dominant in the playoffs, and he was able to overcome a 2-0 series lead. And even though Luka did his best, the Clippers would beat the Mavs in convincing fashion in Game 7 and move on to the second round, where they would face off against the Utah Jazz. And yet again, Utah was managed to go up 2-0 in the series against the Clippers, but Kawhi once again put that backpack on and carried his team to overcome a 2-0 series lead, but it came at a price.
Leonard is fouled and he's limping.
Due to Kawhi Leonard bumping knees with Joe Ingles, he would be out for the rest of the playoffs as he tore his ACL. But even without Kawhi, the Clippers would manage to beat the Jazz in 6 as Paul George and Terrence Mann carried that squad to overcome a 20-point deficit in Game 6. They would finally end up in their first Western Conference Finals ever, where they would ironically play Chris Paul and the Phoenix Suns. And in a poetic way, the Suns would just beat them in the series as the Suns were just a better team, and Paul George, even though he did everything he could to try and force this to a Game 7, they were just no match for the Phoenix Suns, especially Chris Paul, who overall had an amazing series, but had a great closeout Game 6, and nobody was stopping him from winning a championship that year.
The Milwaukee Bucks are NBA champions once again.
He didn't win. The following year would be a year of ups and downs as the Clippers without Kawhi were just fighting to stay alive, and Paul George would be gone for most of the season due to injury. They were able to actually snag a play-in spot though against the T-Wolves, but the Wolves would beat the Clippers and they would just miss the playoffs, and we were given one of the most iconic memes of the 2020s. But the following year, we would see Kawhi Leonard and Paul George back from their injuries and at the forefront, and the Clippers would actually get better as they got John Wall, Norman Powell, and Robert Covington, who were great veterans. However, this season did come with some baggage as Kawhi Leonard and Paul George would be in and out of the lineups due to injuries, and John Wall was just not keeping up with the Clippers as he was not having a great season. And with John Wall not playing great, the Clippers desperately needed a better point guard, and they were actually able to acquire Russell Westbrook in a trade. And even though he was having a bad reputation with the Lakers, everybody loved him on the Clippers, which is very ironic. And with that, the Clippers were able to make the playoffs that year, and they would match up in the first round against the Phoenix Suns. And the first game was a classic as both Kawhi and Russ showed that they still had what it took to play at a high level in the playoffs. Kawhi had an amazing game, and Russell Westbrook had some great hustle plays down the stretch to win Game 1. But when there is a high, there is also a low. With Kawhi at the end of Game 2, he would tear his meniscus and be out for the rest of the playoffs. And the Suns would just reverse sweep them in 5. Even with Russell Westbrook having a great stretch of games in the first round, he was not enough to carry them to beat the Suns, who just had an amazing roster. With Kawhi being out, there was just now a question of whether or not the Clippers would be able to get it done and win a championship anytime soon, especially with Kawhi and PG aging and their contracts coming to an end. The Clippers this season had a very weird yet exciting season. We would see Kawhi resign to the team and secure his future there, and we got to see Kawhi and Paul George finally play a somewhat healthy season, and the team would get a lot better, as they would pull off a trade that would skyrocket their expectations to being an actual contender.
Yeah, our Adrian Wojnarowski, he reported that James Harden is headed to the Los Angeles Clippers.
Harden was now on the team, and Russ was able to take a back seat and come off the bench for the betterment of the team, and Paul George was playing great, and he looked to be more of the number one option at times, especially considering that Kawhi Leonard was coming back to a somewhat normal, and he would still suffer injuries at times during the season. They would manage to have their ups and downs this year, but they were able to manage and win 50 games for the first time since 2017, and they would finish as the 4th seed, and they would once again, for the 3rd time, be matched up against the Dallas Mavericks. But this time, Luka had a little bit of help. And this is somewhat poetic because Kyrie actually was a player that the Clippers could have drafted way back in 2011 if they didn't trade their pick to the Cavaliers. But in Game 1, Kawhi Leonard would be out as he was suffering some leg issues that were causing a lot of concern for the Clippers, and everyone was wondering if he was even going to play in the playoffs. Unfortunately, this team would lose this series in 6. The Clippers tried their best to hold their own against the Dallas Mavericks, but Kawhi Leonard definitely was not the same. Even with him playing, he just did not look 100%. James Harden and Paul George did everything they can to try to beat the Mavericks on their own, but it was no use. Russell Westbrook unfortunately had a terrible series. Luka and Kyrie just torched the Clippers every chance that they got, and their supporting cast was also hitting a lot of great shots. Ending yet another disappointing season, and they were unable to make it to the NBA Finals.
This team, listen, I'm done with this team. Number one, you got Kawhi Leonard locked up. He's the worst superstar you could possibly have because he's hurt half the time, and the other half the time, he does nothing to market the sport. Kawhi and PG, as teammates, they've been together how many times? Only been in the lineup together 46% of their regular season games, 62% of their playoff games, okay? I don't even have an NBA Finals appearance to show for it. When we got with Harden, James Harden right here, ain't been in the finals since 2012 when he was a reserve. Let me get to Russell Westbrook. 7, 1, 5, and 6. Those are the points he scored in the last 4 games. We know what they can do. We know what their resume is. We know they could ball. Do you produce results? That's not what we're getting.
Looking back in NBA history, we had a lot of cursed franchises, like the Charlotte Hornets, the Chicago Bulls after Michael Jordan, the Cavaliers after LeBron, and the Portland Trail Blazers. But if we really look at the Los Angeles Clippers as a franchise, they have to be the most cursed team in NBA history. They had so much potential, so many great players, and unfortunately, they were unable to win a championship. Injuries, bad coaching, blowing way too many leads in the playoffs just stifled their potential. And they had great players. Kawhi, Paul George, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, so many great players. And they still could not win. That is now 40 years after this recent playoff loss. 40 years of a curse that has ruined this franchise from being a successful one. So at the end of it, there really is one last question, one final question that determines the future of this franchise. And that final question is this: will this curse ever be broken?